Hey guys, this is Nicole Van Tassel with I Explore Science. I am actually, there's people working at my house today, so I'm actually in my parents' backyard. So if you're watching, if you can drop me a note and let me know that you can see and hear me, and we'll continue on. But today we are looking at, so we were going to do a workshop on hands-on learning and really the myth about hands-on learning. And we're still going to do that. It's just going to happen on Thursday. But today I wanted to really focus on, this has just been something I've been thinking about with everything that's going on in our, I just want to make sure this is loading and all of that. With everything that's been going on in our world right now, how we really need to tune in to our students and our students' communities, and that's how we are going to be taking our students from being totally disengaged to driven, motivated learners. Though I think this is going to be especially important as we move into the fall. I think there's a high likelihood many of us will be teaching in remote settings, at least part-time or at some point during the school year. I think we can hope that we're not, but the reality is I think it's probably going to happen. So that is really going to force us to make everything really worthwhile and really engaging for our students, because it's going to be even harder to get that participation. And I can see this as one way to, again, really get that student engagement and just bring our students into this learning, into their science learning. So again, if you can hear me, please just drop a note. Let me know that you can hear me, that you can see me, that the internet is working, and we will go ahead and dive right in. Okay, so what are we going to be talking about today? First of all, we're going to be talking about the barrier to connection. So why aren't our students connecting with our science content? And obviously this is a generalization. Some of our students do connect to our science content, but what is stopping a good chunk of our students from really getting that interest in what we're teaching? What simple shift can we make to light that fire and inspire them to be science learners? And some supports to get you started, some examples, some resources that you can start to explore. Okay, thanks so much, guys. I'm glad you're able to hear. Okay, so the barrier to connection. So this is kind of funny. It's funny I have a canon here, right? Okay, so I loved history growing up. My undergrad was in history and environmental science. I loved, my initial certification was in history as well, and I added science, and I did part of my student teaching in history, and I did part of my student teaching in science. So the reason, though, I loved history was the stories. I was an avid reader. I read a ton of historical fiction, and for whatever reason, my history textbook was an extension of that. So I loved reading about what happened in these different periods of time. But so I came into history, I'm going to teach history and all my kids are going to love it and it's going to be so awesome and yada yada. But of course, just because I loved history, and this is the same with science, doesn't mean that my students are going to love history like I did. It doesn't mean my students are going to love science like I do. Yes, you have students who are just naturally interested in these topics, just like I was just naturally interested in history or whatever reason. I don't know why. I just liked history. I still like history. But just going into it with I just love learning about these time periods, so you should love learning about these time periods too, and that's why you should really love this lesson about the American Revolution or the Mexican Revolution or whatever we were teaching about. That didn't really fly with my students. My students were like, why should we learn this? What's the point? So this was also pre-Hamilton. I feel like I could do a so much better job now that I've experienced, I don't know, just Hamilton the musical, because Hamilton the musical made such an amazing connection between what happened in the past and how those issues are still so relevant today. And Hamilton was a white guy from the past, but they made it relevant to the lives of immigrants today, because he was still an immigrant. He was a different kind of immigrant, but he was still an immigrant. Anyway, my point though is just that we can't just go into our science classes and say that our students, and I don't know why you're not seeing my right slide. You're supposed to be seeing I hate it when it does this. You're supposed to be seeing a cannon right now, but that's okay. There he goes. So I lost my train of thought now that I got distracted by the cannon. Oh yeah, the point is that we can't just go into our science classes and be like, you should learn science because it's interesting, or because you need it to be well-rounded, or because you're going to need it for college, or because you just have to know it. Like, that is not, unfortunately, like, we might think, oh, that's a good enough reason, but it's not a good enough reason. It is not enough to actually connect our students to the content. What students need, and what really any individual needs to connect to content, and now I lost my stupid window, is like that stories connection. So like I said, I loved history, and where did my stinking window go now? Oh yeah, here it is. I'm lost. Okay, so yeah, these are like the reasons that we've always been told to like give kids, like, you need it for your basic skills, you need it, it's going to help you in college, it's going to help with a job, whatever. This is not good enough anymore. If it ever was, it's not going to get our students to buy in. However, they are going to buy in when they can actually connect with like the why behind it. And that means we need to give them a why. For me, connecting with history, I connected with the human stories in that. And if I were to go teach history today, I would, again, bring those human stories. And again, that's what Hamilton did. These are the stories of people in the past, and this is how it connects with your lives today. That's what we need to be doing in science. And that leads me into our shift, what we need to be, the simple shift that we need to make. And it's probably going to take you like an hour to see my new picture, which is just a pair of sneakers. But I don't know, shift like we're moving, you know. But our barrier is we don't have a why for that. We don't have a connection for our students. So our simple shift is just finding that connection, but it's not finding just like any connection. It's about finding a connection that actually matters to your students. And this is the thing that I think the NGSS has done really well. It is saying, yes, let's find authentic phenomena in the world to investigate. But I also think that this is where sometimes we get distracted and we fall short, because the world is full of phenomena, but it doesn't mean that every phenomenon is going to matter to our students. So our goal as educators is to tune in to our students and find an issue or a relationship or an experience that is significant for them. So the simple shift, I can't say these words, is to tie our content into these things that matter. So again, stories. And I know we talk about storylines and those are a little bit different, but stories are like, how does this science impact actual real live human beings? I was just listening to a podcast today, and it was saying how there's this study done that people are more likely to donate sums of money to individuals than they are to like entire regions of people. So if they hear a story of like one single person who lost everything in a hurricane, they are more likely to donate to that, more likely to donate after hearing that story than they are if they hear like, oh, these 1,000 people lost everything in this hurricane. Because we are like fine-tuned evolutionarily or whatever to connect to people and to stories. So to put our content into that kind of relevant example, that's bringing like the humanity back in, and it's giving our students a way into the content and a starting place to connect with it. Along those lines, I mean, this is the group for middle and high school students. Our adolescents are starting to find their place in the world, and they want to do things that matter. I remember being such a dork in middle school and just wanting to like do things that made a difference in the world. I mean, I still do. I'm still a dork, but I just remember having this like drive, like everything I did, I just was like inspired I wanted to make a difference. I wanted my projects to be like big. I wanted them to have an impact on my community. I wanted to like do things that mattered. And our students feel that way too, whether they're going to admit it or not. They have that drive in them too. And when we give them things that like are just, oh, here's this worksheet in our classroom, or here's this project that no one is ever going to see, we're not taking advantage of that natural like drive to do real work in the world. This is also, I feel like this is an issue when if we're gonna have this remote teaching. In our classroom, we can say, yeah, do this project or do this worksheet because I'm in front of you and you are in my classroom and you have no other choice because you're sitting here. But if we're teaching them remotely, we can't like just be keeping them busy and giving them this busy work and saying like, this is your grade. Like, we have to give them a reason beyond this is your grade to do that work. So I know this is kind of like my dad just came into the backyard. I know this is kind of like a hard pill to swallow because it's going to mean rethinking, like, again, how we approach science instruction. But we really need to think about the work that we're asking our students to do and think about the why behind it and make sure we have a strong reason for that why. Like, even thinking about some of our assessments and our projects and our activities. Ask yourself, like, why are our students doing this? Beyond just, okay, to prove that you learned that. Could we add something? Could we do something more to give it more of a why? To bring more meaning to that task or to that skill or to that work so that there is more of a reason behind it. And there's a resource that I'm going to share with you at the end of this workshop that is all about how leaders communicate, and it's all about like finding that why and how it has to do with some like companies as well. But certain companies have really embraced their why, and they're very successful with that because they can connect to their audience. And it's kind of like that in the same way. We need to connect our students to our why. Like, why are we learning this? They need to buy into that why just as much as we buy into it. Okay, so I know I've mentioned this before, but I did it in like that Don't Be a Dino video when I was thinking about like some of the changes that were coming about because of the COVID pandemic and all of that. But we really need to let go of this like science is sanitized approach where it's just the content, it's abstract, or it's just it's logical, there's no emotion, there's no viewpoints to it. And we really need to embrace science as like the human societal endeavor that it is. Science is conducted to like benefit our world, our society. Sometimes it's conducted for not so good reasons. We need to be aware of that as well. But it is in no way like disconnected from humans. So I don't know why we would ever think that, but there's no reason we should pass that on to students because all it does is show them like, I'm not interested in this. Again, we're social creatures. Like, let's bring that social impact back into our science classroom. Okay, so with that in mind, let's start thinking about how we can use science content positively, like all the time, framing our science investigations to address societal problems. And this is kind of where I was coming like this, past weekend with everything going on, not just all of the, racial injustice issues and social justice issues, but all of the other issues that are going on in our world. But that's what, again, just brought all these ideas back into my mind. But let's start thinking about our curriculum and framing it from this perspective. And I'm going to give you some examples, and they're not scary. And you still can't see I hate it when you still can't see my simple shift picture. Simple shift. Now you should see my simple shift picture. Okay. So I'm going to give you my examples, and it's probably going to take 20 minutes to see my little cool anchor there. Oh, no, there it goes. Okay, so, like I said, there are some topics that might be scary, but some don't have to be scary. So just hang in there and you can take it wherever you want to take it. But for example, social justice issues, community environmental problems, medical ethical issues and challenges, these are all like super engaging areas that you could find great phenomena to tie your content to engage your students in amazing discussions, to engage them in, to add that rationale behind why should we learn this. Like if you're learning about, well, before I get into one more thing, another option though, if that scares you a little bit, you could do something like, well, what about preparing for careers? You could use, and not just like college prep kind of careers, but maybe you have students who, you know, are like inclined to go into trades. Our science storylines don't have to, and I talked to somebody over the like last week about this. She wants to develop storylines that are designed for her students who are more likely to go into like trade schools. Our storylines don't have to be like college prep storylines. They can be like material science, or like what, I don't know, the science behind welding, and like the science behind, I don't know, other things like that. But things that that they might use in different trade schools, or like culinary arts kind of things, and all the chemistry and what's that, like gastro stuff. I don't know. I watch a lot of the Food Channel, but the word is escaping me right now. That kind of fancy stuff. So that's another, maybe a little bit less scary way of still connecting to that our students' needs. And again, this is like tailored to your students. So a trade school approach, or like a culinary approach, or whatever I'm talking about, might not fit your students. So don't go with it if it doesn't fit your students. The whole point is you tune in to the needs of your students. But another thing, like another less scary option, could be how could our students use science to protect and serve like our families? So thinking things like ecology and community gardens, or like chemistry and understanding pollution, and then again, like with racial equality issues, biology and all of that. And I'm going to share a resource with that. But so some examples here. So let's say you're teaching a weather and climate unit. You could choose as a phenomenon, like a lot of times we see weather and climate, and I think there's a unit out there somewhere, and I can't remember who created it, but it's kind of like this sanitized, like, why does it rain in this place? And like, honestly, my weather and climate unit is pretty sanitized too. It's like about tornadoes that happen in the desert. And it's like kind of, I mean, I thought it was interesting when I was creating this unit, because it's like, oh, I didn't know tornadoes happen in the desert. But at the same time, it's sanitized in the sense that it deals with no social issues. So let's say we wanted to like bring in a social issue to a weather and climate unit. Let's say we focus on like drought in third world countries, or really any of the impacts on third world countries who have not contributed to the issue of climate change, yet are being disproportionately affected by it. That is a super engaging issue. And I know when I taught climate change to my own 9th graders, that was one thing that like they really like tuned into. They thought that was really unfair, that there were people, I think there was like a video we watched about people in India or something like that were like losing their homes, even though they had never really released a whole lot of carbon into the atmosphere, yet they were being affected by climate change. It wasn't their fault. They thought that was super unfair. They didn't like that, and that connected them to the content. That made them interested in the content. But let's say you want like a more local connection. You don't want that world, across the world kind of thing. Maybe instead you focus on how an increase in heat waves are going to lead to, or like low income individuals are expected to suffer more from an increase in heat waves from climate change than like upper class or whatever, higher income individuals. That could be another one. So phenomena for genetics and heredity could be like intergenerational trauma, like how genes are passed down, how genes typically change. You could tie all of these concepts into this idea of like intergenerational trauma. You could also tie in like a more complex idea of like epigenetics and switching genes on and off without changing your DNA. And that could be the vehicle that you get into genetics and heredity. And that could, I mean, there's intergenerational trauma. There's like studies that are everything from impacts of slavery to impacts of the Holocaust to like even Civil War veterans. So, I mean, across the board, whether you're like whatever background you have, or what race you are, or anything like that, you can probably connect to some sort of intergenerational trauma. I mean, not every single person, but like there is examples for a variety of like backgrounds and cultures and all of that, because lots of people experience trauma. So those are some like big scary issues, and they definitely ask us as educators to be super brave. But the thing is that you're not giving your students like the views or the answers to like believe in or to follow. You're just giving them the opportunity to investigate these science questions and then to make like the science-backed conclusions. So you're guiding them to understand the science behind it, but you're not saying like, this is, you know, this is what's happening with climate change, so now these are the economic actions that we should take as a result. That's not your job as a science teacher. But you can bring their attention to these people are disproportionately affected by climate change, and that is the reality of it, and that's something that we should be aware of. And this is the science behind climate change. So it's a vehicle into understanding the science, and it is a rationale behind why should we know the science. So again, you're helping them see how the science fits into the big picture of society, but you're not telling them what to believe or any of the other like political or economic or any of that stuff. So there's no reason to say like, well, I can't touch that topic because I can't tell my students like how to vote or something like that. That's not your job. I'm not saying to do that. But again, on a less scary level, you can do things like an ecology and plants unit, tying a native garden ecosystem to the issue of food deserts and community gardens. You could tie, like, if you're learning about heat and thermal energy and like electricity and things like that, to maybe something like fire safety. There was a horrific fire in my area last August where it resulted in like the deaths of 5 children. It haunted me for, it was horrible. I mean, I didn't even know these people, and it was just sickening to think of, like, as a parent. And it, like, I'm not saying that you should give your students that story, but fire safety could be an issue of, like, you know, electricity and how it can turn into fires, and the importance of fire alarms, and, you know, connecting to your students. Do you have a fire alarm in your house? Do your families have fire alarms? Again, just you can tie these into real people's stories and real people's experiences, and give a rationale to the content of why do we want to learn that? Why do we want to know that? In a matter chemical changes unit, tying into air and water pollution in a local area. Air and water pollution, I mean, if you look here in my city, there was a factory that actually was shut down recently by the EPA because it was just polluting this certain area, and there was a much higher incidence of cancer in that area, like in the neighborhoods around where the factory was located. That is like a perfect phenomena for any of our local city schools to investigate, because it is local, it ties directly to their neighborhoods, it is an issue, I mean, that they can connect to and understand. Most people have at least known somebody who has gotten cancer. I mean, and you can build from those connections. So these are kind of like less scary topics, but again, they can still be tied to your students' lives and experiences. These are big anchors. You'd still have your investigative phenomena that are like lower level things. They're kind of day-to-day experiences that they've, you know, cookies wafting down the hall or whatever. I mean, you would obviously want to tie them to your anchor more succinctly, more cohesively. But these like big ideas are the hook that you can bring your students into your science content in a way that is not just like, this is a weird kind of curious thing that you should be interested in because it's science and you should know and like and be interested in science. It's more like, I was just thinking about Selena, your paper. I need to go back and reread all of that. Because, yeah, it's like about it's like about addressing the whole student, and like even like and just even bringing in communities and being responsive to our students' needs and like social, emotional, and like all of that. So bringing, these are all big anchors. You still need your investigative level phenomenon. Your students can't go investigate a factory and all and the cancers it's causing, but that's the hook that's going to bring them in, and they will be able to, through your investigations, come back and explain, you know, how that pollution led to chemical changes, or you know, I mean, you could bring in literally everything to like DNA changes in a unit like that. What do I think about Earth and space science anchor phenomena? So all standards can have a phenomena. The thing with anchors, though, remember, is an anchor is not just one. It's not just linking one standard. It's linking multiple standards. Also, for 1-3 Earth's place in the universe, is that the one with the, like, where it talks about, there's one where it talks about, like, eclipses and the moon and something else. Eclipses and the moon and seasons. don't be afraid to break up standards too. Like if you choose an anchor, you can take a piece of one standard and then a bunch of other standards and put them together, because your goal really isn't to build units that are covering, like, are check marking off standards. Your goal is really to engage your students in explaining, scale properties. Okay, so scale properties, that is, thanks to Erin. So let me finish my first thought. Your goal is to explain phenomena. So don't be afraid to break up standards. Just make sure you address them somewhere else. If you split a standard in half, address pieces of it in one storyline, address the rest of it in a different storyline. But when you're choosing an anchor, anchors really shouldn't be able to be explained by one standard, because it's so complex that it takes a lot of disciplinary ideas and a lot of different ideas to put it together. So like something like scale properties, on its own, it's not really that, it's not scale properties, it's not that engaging, but maybe you could tie it to something larger than that, like if you are looking at something related to, why Jupiter has like a bazillion moons and the Earth only has one, or how Earth caught a second moon, or briefly and then it went away. And then you can tie in the other standards about the moon into the scale properties, and you are then addressing multiple standards as you're investigating your one anchor. But again, that one doesn't really tie in like a specific environment, like a social justice thing. Anchors take some time to think about, and I don't have one off the top of my hand. So let's see, Marquita said something about being able to use pre-written phenomena. They haven't worked for my students as well as the one I create based on the things they have actually experienced. I agree. I struggle with, I like to look at resources. Like I look at Bozeman Science's Wonder of Science website. I look at like their databases. Most of the time though, I don't really find phenomena that works for me, and like the way I've bundled my standards, or just what I think is gonna, my students are gonna find interesting, or what I find interesting. I think that, again, the goal is that tuning into your students. Like Marquita is saying, you need to think about what your students have actually experienced and what they can connect to. So they might not have personally at the anchor level, they might not have personally experienced it. At the investigative phenomenon level, they've either experienced it or they're experiencing it in your class. But at the anchor level, they might not have experienced it themselves, but they have some kind of emotional connection to it. Like my students were not experiencing the loss of their home due to climate change, flooding in India, but they could connect to those people's stories because it's a human story of losing things that belong to you and being threatened by things outside of your control, and that is something that they could connect to, and that is something that could bring them into the content. So anyway, those are the kind of gist. I guess the big takeaway I want you to remember is it's not about going to a website and finding a phenomena. It's not about trying to check mark off standards. Our goal is we want our students to be excited about science. We want our students to be invested in science, and we really need to start tuning into their interests and their needs and their values, because there's a difference between caring about a student and loving a student and actually valuing a student and valuing them as a person and respecting them as a person. And so it was explained to me, my daughter loves to play Barbies. I hate playing Barbies. However, I was told that I should spend time playing Barbies with her because my daughter knows I love her to death. But playing Barbies with her, even if I don't want to, playing Barbies with her and doing something that she really likes shows that I value her as a person. And it is helping her to have confidence in herself and create her identity. And our students are in that same place. They don't know who they are. They are adolescents. They are young. They don't have confidence in themselves. They're figuring out their place in the world. And our job, again, treating them as a whole person and helping them develop into the whole person. Our job is to help them get to be that whole, like a confident whole person. And investing in the things that they value and being interested in the things that they are interested in, studying the things that they are interested in studying. These are all ways that we can respect them, respect their backgrounds, respect their cultures, respect everything that they can bring to the table, and in return bring them into that science learning and bring them into that discussion and bring them into our science content. So it's not just about choosing as something that might be interesting to them. It's also just about valuing them as people. And I feel like I kind of diverged, and I'm sorry, I meant to mention that earlier. Okay, a couple things I want to just point out. I'm going to put these in the comments. How great leaders inspire action. This is that TED Talk about your why and how you can draw others into your vision. This is an idea of how we can communicate why our science content is valuable and really bring our students into our why, or figure out what our why is. And ideally, we are tuning into our students to figure out our why. I also want to share this article that Lindsay Trop shared with me yesterday. It's from the New York Times. Can biology class reduce racism? I mean, it was a study that was done. It's really interesting to read. I would suggest checking it out. I'm going to post that in the comments. Also posted yesterday in another group I'm in, the Next Gen Navigator from the NSTA. There's some great articles in there about social justice centered science teaching. There was a lot about indigenous populations and how we can bring those perspectives into our science. So I think that's definitely worth checking out. We didn't talk about that at all. So I'm going to post a link to that. And then lastly, I created a 10 question guide to basically help you reflect on who are my students and what is my community, and what are the strengths of my community, what are the challenges my community has faced, what are the strengths of my students, what are the experiences of my students, the backgrounds, all of these things. And the goal is just that by reflecting on these questions, you can by reflecting on these questions. Oh yes, STEM Teaching Tools also has a lot of resources on diversity and all of that. I can't remember. Oh yeah, by reflecting on all of these ideas about our, just reflecting on who our students are, we can kind of be inspired. If we think of, these are some events that happened in my community recently, we might be inspired to use something along those lines as a phenomenon. Or by reflecting on, these are the assets of my community. These are some things that we really do well and some things that we can really bring to the table. We can be inspired to use that as a phenomenon, or as maybe a problem-based learning kind of unit, or a project-based learning unit, or something like that. So we can bring, by knowing our students and just thinking about it, we can bring that in. So I'm going to share links for all of these things as soon as we hop off here. The one thing I want to encourage you is just don't wait. I know school is out for some of you, but you have this opportunity to start thinking about your curriculum for next year. And this is a quote from Anne Frank. How wonderful is it that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world. So you can start thinking about your curriculum right now. You can also just obviously start taking action in your own homes and your own neighborhoods and your own communities, and just get ready to embrace your students and your communities in the fall. And as always, if you would like to continue working together, Kickstart AHA Intro to the NGSS mini course is designed to give you an intro to your content. How do you cover it all using the three dimensional approaches? Why students are naturally invested in your NGSS units, and that again starts with that phenomenon. And it's what we've been talking about, tuning into their needs and bringing that in. How we can shift our student ownership from the teacher to the student in your NGSS classrooms, and it's all about that exploration, so you can get all the details there. And lastly, there's always an open invitation for you to join us in iExplore Academy, which is your step-by-step guide. It's basically a recipe for building your NGSS aligned curriculum. if we really want a curriculum that's customized to our students, that's built on phenomena, that is connecting with them and is tuned into them, it really does mean we have to create it ourselves. And just because you have to create it doesn't mean you have to do that alone. So that's what iExplore Academy is all about. And along those lines, if your district is on board, I'm offering programs directly to schools now and districts where I'll basically walk you through that process. So tuning in to your students and their needs and their interests and everything that they, just tuning into your students and then working through that process to create that customized curricula and the storylines and all of that is just designed for your students and your communities and everything that they value. So you can always reach out for details on that. Okay, so I will post all of those resources. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys, and I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope you'll also join us on Thursday for that the #1 myth about hands-on learning. I'll catch you guys later.